Hello, movie lovers. Welcome home. My name is Amy Henserling, and you are listening to Watch This List. Today, I have a very special guest, Rob, who is going to be talking with us about his top 5 picks for best gritty crime film. We have titled this episode, A Doggedly Nasty Piece of Business, which comes from an article by Jay Cox. Rob actually introduced me to this phrase, which I think is apt for his 5 films. But can you tell us a little bit about what it means to you, Rob? Also, hi.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
That phrase. We were sort of kicking around. What's a good label for? Because there's not really a genre for this kind of thing we're talking about, right? Which is like, I don't know, tough, gritty isn't even right. I think there's one film on this list I probably would say is not particularly gritty, but even though it's quite violent, it's that Tarantino embodies it, doesn't it? And there was so much came up after Tarantino that really copied what he was doing. And then me as a young Tarantino fanboy at the time where he was first bringing his stuff out, then found out later that his stuff was all derivative of other stuff that he's copied and imitated. It's a kind of thread that goes back through crime cinema, probably back to the 60s really, and that's probably more in Japan than anywhere else. So we were trying to come up with a label for that. I like that phrase, a doggedly nasty piece of business, because it's something that Jay Cox of Time magazine said about one of the films we're going to be talking about today, not meant as a compliment. It was meant as you should not watch this film because it is a doggedly nasty piece of business, which is like a red rag to a bull to me. So we're going to adopt it. We like it.
You're like, I want to see that. That's not a con, that's a pro.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say too that one of the threads I think that's through all 5 of these, just besides them being crime films or like centered around, like a mafia sort of scenario or that kind of element, I think your top 5, maybe with the exception of one, all of the men in these movies have like a woman that they really love, actually. So that's kind of a thread that I found when I watched these this past week to prep for this. I was like, a lot of these movies, the main character has a woman that he really is crazy about, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting, and it's interesting. The one you're talking about that doesn't have it really sets it apart as a different kind of a beast.
Exactly, but yeah, I think the word gritty probably doesn't truly encapsulate the spirit of these, but I think it's probably the closest thing as opposed to just being like, well, these are crime films. Well, they're kind of balls to the wall crime films where it's like these are intense, like kind of an uncensored feel where people were like, go for broke. They have like that vibe.
It feels really reductive to define them around violence, but that kind of is the thing. That they're very violent. All these films are very violent, and there's something in that. This is something, I mean, because I, as a film fan, I'm also hugely into horror. I've got to admit, violence seems to have this massive attraction for me in cinema. It doesn't have to be violent for me to love it, but I don't know. Violence is dramatic. Do you know what I mean? It's God forbid that we should have to put up with any violence in our real lives. I don't really have to put up with violence in my real life, and I've never really had to. So it's not about glamorizing it or it being exotic. It's just, it's jugular. It hits you.
So Rob's number 5 pick is Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, directed by Sam Peckinpah, 1974. And that one was not streaming anywhere, and I actually had to buy it off Amazon, and it was like the last one that they had in stock.
Yeah, and I mean, this is Sam Peckinpah, right? So it's not like he's hardly an obscure filmmaker. and you know, it's a well-known film.
And this is one that's on Ebert's great movies list too.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So Rob, tell me. So Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. Tell us just slightly what it's about, and then what it is that kind of solidifies it for you as one of the best of this genre, and then how you feel about it personally, what it does
Okay.
in a personal way to you.
Okay. So Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. Story of a guy who's a bit of a down and outer, downtrodden, living on the outskirts of society type of guy, played by a guy called Benny, played by Warren Oates, who busks and plays piano in dive bars in northern Mexico. And he catches wind of an opportunity because of basically a gang lord in northern Mexico known only as El Jefe. His daughter becomes pregnant to a guy named Alfredo Garcia, and so the guy puts out the order, bring me the head of Alfredo Garcia, I will give, I'll give, I can't remember how much he asked for. It's not $10,000. $10,000 is what Benny.
No, it was like $1 million.
Yeah, so Benny is offered $10,000 to go and fight. So one of the interesting things about this is it presents the organized crime world in Mexico as something of a corporate structure with various layers, and Benny's right at the bottom. In fact, he's not even in it. He needs to break into it to take part. But this is all about him trying to catch a break. It's generally considered that this is about as close to an autobiographical film as Sam Peckinpah ever made. I mean, Benny is very much based on himself. And I mentioned the corporatized kind of structure of the organized crime world he's dealing with, and that he's feels under the heel of, and which over the course of the film he comes to rebel against. There's some real parallels there between how Peckinpah felt with the film industry in Hollywood, and the way it had treated him, and the way he was generally made to feel. And there's just this very strong. I mean, it's Sam Peckinpah is a guy who was really fixated on darkness and despair. I mean, we talk about violence in film. He really revolutionized the portrayal of violence in film. When The Wild Bunch came out, all of a sudden the shootouts were happening in slow motion, and they were using blood squibs, and they were putting hamburger meat into the blood squibs as well to make it as gory as possible, and it just shocked the hell out of American audiences at the time, and electrified them as well. Whereas this film is surprisingly warm. It's very much a character piece. We've talked about Warren Oates. You've also got Isela Vega playing Elisa, his lover, girlfriend, partner, and they embark on the road trip together. And both of them are just immense. It's got the most incredible performance from these two actors, and it's actually a very affecting love story. But being Peckinpah, it will get put through the mincer basically, and things get pretty nihilistic by the end of the film. So it's a raw, painful film. This is the kind of thing I love, you know. So it makes you feel, it makes you care. The violence in it, getting back to that old conversation about is it gratuitous or not, I don't know, but it has an impact on you because you care about the characters involved. In fact, the only criticism I would have on violence on film is if you actually don't really care about anyone involved, and even then it can be fun, but it's a different sort of film. Whereas this is not. This is I would call this a drama, and it becomes something of an action film in the second half. But all that action then is through the prism of, oh my God, what's Benny going through, and how is this going to end up for everyone involved? And I just think it's an incredibly powerful piece of cinema.
And it also reminded me a lot of, there's like a tenderness at the heart of it that I think that is a through line through a lot of your films that you chose, which I found very interesting. And then there's also a scene where she's like sitting in the shower that made me think that Casino Royale just like took that completely. I don't know if you thought this,
No, I
but
haven't.
the scene with Daniel Craig and Eva Green.
Yeah.
So I was like, that's got to be, there's no way, because it was too similar. Of course, she's clothed in Casino Royale because it's not Peckinpah, but still, it's the same sort of.
Yeah. It's not the 70s.
Yeah, it's the same sort of sentiment where you're watching like a very guarded, kind of hardened person that you wouldn't assume would have natural affection. And then they display that in a very like disarming way. Part of the reason why I liked the movie so much was because of that scene, honestly.
Which is then mirrored later on in another shower scene involving Alfredo Garcia, which is a lot less heartwarming.
Which is a lot less romantic. Yes. So all that said, see this movie, seek it out if you can. It's a little bit harder to get than the rest of these. The rest of them are much easier. But Bring Me the Hell of Alfredo Garcia is a worthy contender from Rob's list, and it's on Ebert's Great Movies list. He has a great review of that as well. And if you have no experience with Peckinpah in general, I think this is it will give you all that you need to know whether you like him or not.
Yeah. I mean, it is a little bit unusual in the sense that it is so quiet for the first. Quiet. I'm using the word quiet. It's not like it's not violent. It's not like it's not suspenseful and full of dread in the first half. But it is quite unusual. And, you know, it's a film that has been reappraised because when it came out, it was reviled by most. Maybe not Ebert, but
right.
it was generally considered to be an absolute pile of garbage and immoral too in a lot of ways, which sometimes you hear these reactions to these films and I don't quite understand it. I mean, it was the 70s. It's not like it was particularly edgy compared to what else was coming out, even in America. So, but yeah, it's
shock value will probably be less for someone today than it was at the time, but still, it's still intense. I mean, I was like, it's a lot. So it's not just for, it's not going to appear.
We're going to talk a bit about villains in this, like with all these films. That I think another thing they have in common, I would need to check. But I think pretty much all of them have fantastic villains. It's that sense a little bit in Alfredo Garcia where the Peckinpah angle and then some of the casting, the fact that it starts out looking like it's a period Western, but then you realise it's set in the modern day, has this weird sort of through line to reality and a very sort of dark version of reality, which I think makes it quite powerful.
Number 4 for Rob's top 5 crime picks is The Italian Connection, 1972, directed by, do you pronounce it DeLeo?
DeLeo, I think.
DeLeo.
Fernando DeLeo. It's Italian, so you have to sing it.
Italian Connection, which I had never seen and actually has an interesting connection to Tarantino because he said that he based Jules and Vincent off of these two guys.
I didn't know that either.
Did you not?
No. Makes sense. No,
Samuel Jackson and John Travolta's characters are both based on these guys. But Rob, tell us how you're supposed to go into this movie, because I thought it was going to be very serious, and then it kind of feels a little bit like a spoof in a way. So what is the ideal mindset? Just if you have no idea who this guy is, what's the best way to approach this?
I think it depends where you're coming in from. So Italian genre film in general is a different thing, right? You know, it feels very different. I don't know how many giallo films you've seen or Italian horror films and that kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
It's it is really disorienting for anyone who's not used to it. And I almost don't notice it now because I watch so much Italian exploitation stuff. I don't even notice that how ridiculous some of it is. So it's the weird thing about so this is what is generally called Eurocrime. So there's an entire genre of films, mainly coming out of Italy, but were sort of financed from various European countries, which were a kind of hard-edged crime thriller which came out, and they were like a lot of Italian exploitation film. It was copying something from America. In this case, it was films like Dirty Harry, that kind of thing. And because of the way they made films, and because of some of the Italian sensibilities for those sort of these are real bottom drawer exploitation films, is how they come out. Very cheap, very rough and ready. And a little bit like exactly the same thing happened with Westerns, which too were exploitation films. You know, they were very cheap. They used semi-washed up stars from the States to come over and star in them. And they were very derivative. But in producing that, what sort of went into this echo chamber, and what got projected back was kind of this really weird version of what we were sort of would be used to from American films, but with some very strange sensibilities. So they are often quite comical in an unintentional way, you know, and sometimes that's even down to the fact that everything is dubbed. I mean, I've heard people at the time sort of say about a film, something like The Italian Connection or one of its brethren, that, well, I could only get the dubbed English version, so I'm really annoyed because I like to watch it in the original language. There's not actually much point when it comes to these sorts of films, because there is no natural live recording of the Italian of this. It was probably, what would happen is that the actors were given their lines all in English. They said them in English and then they were dubbed over. And they would only use the same actors for the imports. So in this case, you know, Henry Silva and Woody Strode came back in to sort of do their lines, but everyone else was probably redone by someone else. So it's actually very hard to know.
Yeah, because when you watch it, it is like it is like a spaghetti Western where they're speaking, like I heard it in Italian, but then some of the actors weren't speaking in Italian, so there is a like definite mismatch
Oh
there.
yeah, and
Like
yeah,
when you're watching it.
sometimes they would just be doing it in Italian. It's interesting actually. The reason they do that is because, if I got this right, Mussolini outlawed sound stages because he was worried about stuff being recorded which would go against his authority. So it was all sort of having control over what was recorded, that sound had to be recorded separately, and apparently it was easier to police or something like that. So even today, I think Cinecittà, the big studio in Rome, doesn't have sound stages. So anything, I think Gangs of New York was all dubbed because Scorsese filmed it there. So it's just a convention thing that you could sort of get used to. But I really think the dubbing is the thing that puts a lot of people off, because it was done in a very workmanlike fashion, but it's pretty serious in its intent. And I think that's the thing. You can laugh at these films, but they are generally they are taking themselves reasonably seriously, but not seeing themselves as great works of art. They were banged out. They were bashed out for a quick buck. You know, they are true exploitation films. So I think, I mean, yeah, if you don't know that, it's just different. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where Italian genre, it's the same with Italian horror films. Very, very sort of not the societal years of lead stuff so much, but the conventions and the filmmaking techniques were very similar. And I think there's a sort of level to which, if you watch enough of them, you stop finding them. You always find them a little bit amusing, but you sort of almost compartmentalize it and just watch the film. And what I love about Italian Connection is, I mean, it's almost plot. I mean, it does have a plot. It's incredibly simple. It's basically all set in Milan. There are these two hitmen being sent over from America, played by Woody Strode and Henry Silva. These two tough guys that are being sent over by the American mob, whichever part of them, you know, it's sort of indeterminate exactly what part of America they're from. It's probably New York. They come across and they're told, right, now someone's stolen our drugs. Our sort of associates in Milan have told us it's this guy, a guy called Luca Canali, who's played by an actor called Mario Adorf, who I think is just awesome. I love this guy. He's got
Yes.
the most
He's the
incredible face.
standout.
Oh,
Yeah.
he's a force of nature, and he's in a lot of great
Mm-hmm.
Italian films. This is the guy. Don't just kill him. Make an example of him. We want him to die horribly, basically.
Right.
And it's just got this incredibly visceral action sensibility that DeLeo was really great at. I mean, his car chases. We're talking little Fiat 500s screaming through the crowded streets of Milan. It doesn't look safe, and it probably wasn't safe. They didn't get permits. They didn't clear the way. The actors themselves. There is a scene in this film where Luca Canali is hanging off the front of a van and headbutting his way through a windshield as it drives about, I don't know, 60 miles an hour down a small street. That's actually Mario Adolf doing it, because these guys would do that. They didn't have stuntmen. They would just use their own lead actors to do this stuff. And it's just a sort of unrelenting, brutal, mean-spirited action film, really. And it's just, I kind of picked it because I wanted to get a Eurocrime in there. There's actually a lot of films that are very similar to The Italian Connection. I think it's one of the best ones.
Yeah, and I think if you know that going in, you're fine. I had no idea what I was about to watch, and I had just watched Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, and I was like, it just so threw me. It's almost like the Black Dynamite movie I watched.
Yeah.
Where you're like, is this supposed to be both mocking the thing that it's depicting, but then also being very, very serious about it and in earnest? So I think if you know right off the bat that like this is going to be dubbed and it's not going to quite match, and there's like all these different facets to it, I think that you could probably just enjoy it more because your expectations are correct. It's not a straight narrative.
It's a bit like Hong Kong action cinema. There's quite a few of these worlds of very deep seams of genre films that people, there are people who are massive experts on this stuff, and I'm not one of them, but the conventions are just so different. And yeah, Black Dynamite, I mean, that's a parody of blaxploitation, which could almost be a nice natural step between something like Peckinpah and something like this, because they have the more lurid exploitation feel to them. But this is like this is the stuff that's getting mocked. Do you know what I mean? So that's why it looks like a parody, because parodies just copy it. They'll just do what it's done and laugh at that. So that's sort of why it looks.
Okay, that makes
that's
sense.
where the parody comes from, almost.
Yeah. So this, I would say, more so than the rest, just brace yourself for kind of a different experience, but it's an unusual one and a special one if you're not used to this sort of exposure. So I think this is kind of like a nice in, or like a natural in into this realm, and then you can get a taste for it and see if it's something that you like.
So yeah, it's definitely one of the more propulsive, entertaining versions of these sorts of films.
Yes, so that is The Italian Connection, and it is. I rented it off of Amazon. I think that's probably the best version that you're going to get if you can watch it in the Italian. That's probably preferable, but check it out. That is by far and away the most interesting one for me that I hadn't seen off of Rob's list. So check that out. Now, number 3, we have our shared passion for, which is Jonathan Glazer's directorial debut, Sexy Beast, from 2000. So this is our first kind of away from the 70s time that we're getting out of there. We're going to go back though, don't worry. And Sexy Beast stars Ray Winstone and Ben Kingsley, the great Ben Kingsley, Sir Ben. This one I think stands out most for the performances and the unusual script. But what is it that because I know you love this movie. What is it that you really love most that you feel like makes it outstanding as opposed to just like another crime movie or like another mafia movie or another hitman movie?
Yeah, I was thinking about this because I was posting a couple of thoughts on Letterboxd the other day about this, and this rewatch was the first. I'd almost forgotten about it. We nearly left this one off the list. It was a late ring in that I had to get Amy to change because I was like, "Oh, Sexy Beast," I forgot. Um,
So good.
it's one of those films. It's what everyone remembers from it is Ben Kingsley as Don Logan. I mean, I saw this in the cinema at the time with no warning. I remember I turned up at the cinema one day. I was like, what's on? Sexy Beast? What's that? It looks like some sort of crime film. Fine, I'll go watch it. I'm trying to remember how it felt to me in that opening scene where the guy that had played Gandhi and, the gentle Jewish collaborator of Schindler in Schindler's List, this guy who always played these refined characters. The first line he says in the film is he gets out of a car and says, "God, I could change my shirt. I'm sweating like a cunt." It's shocking. He is it, and he is terrifying. And if you'd said to me before, Ben Kingsley plays a terrifying thug, it's like, what? No, I don't think so. But yeah, he really does. So, I mean, the story, for those of you who haven't seen it, is basically Ray Winston plays a guy. He's living in this beautiful villa in Spain, having a wonderful life, lounging next to his pool, and we sort of realise eventually that he is a crim who has gotten out. So he's robbed banks or whatever. He's been involved in that life, and he's retired, and he's gone away, and he's living with his wife in Spain, and just having a great time. And Ben Kingsley's Don Logan is a guy from his past who wants to haul him back in to do another job. The characters who live in Spain, because it's Gal and his wife and two friends who all know Don, we get quite a lot of time of them saying, "We've heard from Don, Don's coming." And the way that they act before we ever see him means that we know something horrible is about to happen. They are terrified of this guy.
He's like, hold on. So wait, you got a call. Hold on. Wait, let me say this again. You got a call. You answer the phone. And they're like, yeah. It's like that dinner scene where they tell them like, yes, we got the call is like, oh, shit. Like we know that something's going down.
And it doesn't, the information we're getting doesn't really add. It's sort of like, well, he wants you to do a job. I'm not going to do a job. And I remember the first time watching that thinking, that doesn't seem that big a deal. I mean, yeah, the guy might not want you to say no, but just say no.
Just say no.
And then you meet Don.
Then you'll be on your way.
Yeah.
And Dee Dee's like, we could just leave. He's like, that wouldn't be a good idea.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that. Yeah. That's not the way that you want to handle this situation. It's kind of like the great scene with Michael and Sonny, where it's like, this isn't you're taking this very personally. Oh, college boy, Michael, and Sonny's like, you're just taking this very personally. This is not personal. It's kind of that vibe where you're like, this is not the way you want to deal with this. Trust me. I know.
It's the whole, I mean, a lot of gangster films, like The Godfather, for instance, focus a lot on the social structures and the rules, and it kind of gets mapped out in quite a lot of detail. Whereas this film is much more impressionistic about how it gives you a feel for how this whole subculture fits together and how it works. It's all done through glimpses and oblique references to what's happened in the past, and just the way that they speak to each other about inconsequential things. It just feels very, I think a lot of good crime films for me are ones that give me a feeling of, God, I really would hate to find myself hanging out with these guys. Do you know what I mean? Like, you do not want to go anywhere near these people. And I think Sexy Beast is quite effective because it's a guy who's gotten away from it. So you feel that you're kind of like, yes, you got to keep away from that stuff, but he's getting drawn back in. Yeah.
He's trying at least. Yeah. Yeah. This is Sexy Beast is fantastic, especially if you want to see these guys like kind of at their peak. And if you're a fan of things that are sort of against type, I think this is great for Ben Kingsley, especially because Ian McShane is fantastic, but it is something that we're used to seeing from him. Whereas Kingsley is like out of left field, and I think it's really entertaining and holds up.
It's one of those it'll blow anyone away. I mean, I defy anyone not to be blown away by that performance. It's one for the ages. It's just incredible. It's worth it just to watch him.
I got it. Yeah, I agree. Sexy Beast. That one, I believe it was on HBO Max like a month ago or so. This time I had to rent it off Amazon, but you can find it pretty easily there. Definitely worth the watch. And okay, so getting to Rob's top two. This one is one that's a long-term fave of mine, which he had said earlier. Tarantino's not involved, but he is in a slight way with this one because he wrote this. This is True Romance by Tony Scott in 1993. So Tony Scott directed, but Tarantino did write this, and also definitely shares the Sexy Beast on how passionate the lead is for his lady.
Yeah, it's another love story, isn't it? Really,
it's another love
it's
story.
Interesting that all three, at least three of these films are love stories. Probably first and foremost.
Yeah, and I don't even think that was intentional on your part because you weren't even focusing on that, but it just so happened. I was like, Rob's kind of like a wife guy, where he's like,
I'm just a romantic.
He likes, yeah. But
absolutely,
yeah, it's kind of it's a nice thing. And True Romance is wild. I had forgotten how crazy the violence is. This one's a lot more like Alfredo Garcia than the other two, I think, where it just goes hard.
Yeah, it's probably. I mean, this and Sexy Beast, out of the films we're talking about today, they're probably the two most flat out entertaining ones, I would say. And True Romance is a little more conventional in the sense that it is chronologically sort of just goes in a straight line, and it's very dialogue driven, and there are shootouts, and it's very traditional in that sense. But at the time when it came out, I think it was Tarantino's first script that he sold or that he wrote. It sort of surprised me in a way that I would rate this above any of the films he directed, but I think it does benefit from a bit of distance between director and writer, actually. The script was changed a fair bit from the original script. I know the ending is completely different. And I've actually seen they did film an alternate ending which was more faithful to the original script, which I hate. And I'm really glad they changed it.
Yeah, because it was like very doomed, right? It was very dark.
It was just a bummer. It was just an absolute bummer.
Exactly.
To me, it doesn't fit the rest of the film. And I haven't read Tarantino's script. Maybe it's just generally darker, but there is a sort of upbeat warmth to this film, weirdly.
I know.
Which really works. The relationships between the characters are incredibly. They're quite, in a way, they're very cartoonish characters, and there are some moments of absurdism in this film, which maybe don't fit the whole film. They may be like a little bit dissonant, but generally the relationships are very, very compelling. And then there are moments of pretty heavy drama sort of interspersed throughout. So it's apparently it bombed. I mean, it stars Christian Slater and Patricia Arquette are a central pairing. And he is very much he's obviously based on Tarantino. He's a guy that works at a comic book store and is a bit of a loser, and it feels like he wants bigger and better things for himself, and he loves movies.
Movies, kung fu.
He's going to a Sonny Chiba, who would later turn up in Kill Bill. He goes to a Sonny Chiba triple feature. stumbles into this
As one does.
beautiful girl who strikes up a conversation with him, and then they have a wonderful night together. And then the next day, she admits that she's a call girl, and his boss paid her to come and meet him, but she's fallen in love with him. So it starts out a bit like purposely almost playing with these conventions of love at first sight and the hooker with heart of gold and all that sort of stuff, almost to an absurd degree. But then it just runs with it. And actually the way that Slater and Arquette play it, you totally buy that they would love each other. And they're both sort of quite lovable. The weird thing with Slater's character, I find, is he's delusional and he has visions of Elvis and talking to Elvis in the bathroom. And the plot gets going when Elvis encourages him to go back to Alabama, is Patricia Arquette's name, go back to Alabama's pimp and get her stuff back and kill him. He goes there deliberately wanting to kill this guy because he's a piece of shit.
Right.
And this guy is Drexel, played by Gary Oldman, who I remember I didn't even recognize Gary Oldman when I first saw this film. I had seen him in, I think, Dracula before that.
He is a maniac.
He is like quite a scary pimp, and he's got dreadlocks.
Bonkers.
He likes to think of himself as a black guy, but he's a white guy.
Yeah.
So he talks in a sort of, African-American patois kind of thing. And he's just a nasty piece of work.
Yeah, and you can't really talk about True Romance without mentioning that it's like, I mean, there's like, this cast could be the most stacked cast of all time. It's like James Gandolfini, Christopher Walken, Dennis Hopper.
Especially for the 90s. I mean, this is 90s royalty.
Brad Pitt. I mean, like almost every single Val Kilmer, everybody you see in this movie you would recognize, and they're all there, and they're all young, and like it's just, if anything, if nothing else convinces you to watch this, that like just the Tony Scott Tarantino partnership, this cast is one of the best supporting casts I've ever seen in my life, and it's so fun, even when it's outrageous.
I would argue that for a lot of these guys, and some of these are massive, like titans, that it's some of the best stuff they ever did is in this film.
So yes, the movie feels very Tarantino while also feeling very Tony Scott, because I just recently watched Top Gun. So there's like it is an interesting merge of those two sensibilities, and I think it works. In a very 90s way too.
There's a Christmas to Tony Scott, the way he makes films, which is actually a perfect counterpart to Tarantino's writing. I think he pulls this into a certain shape. I love Tarantino, but he's clearly self-indulgent in a lot of the stuff that he does. And sometimes, for me, it works generally, but I can understand the criticisms, right? And it's not always, sometimes it's a bit too much. There's none of that in this. It's like it's totally reined back, and the ability that Scott has to get incredible performances is not something he generally gets praised for, but this movie shows how he can do that. And it's just such a clear narrative. It's a very satisfying, clear narrative with clear good guys, bad guys that you're really terrified of, like massive stakes. It's very funny. It's very suspenseful, and it's just got some of these great performances in it as well. So yeah, I don't think you can go wrong with it.
And I will say the music too, Rob. Hans Zimmer did the score, and it is based on the score from Terrence Malick's Badlands. So if you listen to that, that kind of a weird, almost like a tinkling coconut sound, that is,
it's almost
in
Christmassy.
Badlands.
It's almost got a Christmassy feel to it, I find.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen Badlands, but when I was younger and I watched Badlands, I watched it after True Romance, and I was like, why did they take the True Romance soundtrack? It's literally like
right. I haven't seen Badlands for years.
Okay,
I can't remember what the score
is. It's almost
like.
identical. You'd be amazed. Like, we'll have to look it up at where you can hear it before we end. But yeah, it is almost exact, which is fitting because it's a similar scenario where it's like, that whole lovers on the run sort of aesthetic, which it didn't start with Badlands, obviously, but I think that's a very intentional homage, and it sounds incredibly similar. And it's Hans Zimmer, so you can't really go wrong there either.
No,
Yeah,
he's the best.
he is the best. So
I think.
check out True Romance. It's Tony Scott, 1993. Again, I hate to be a broken record here, but this is also not streaming. But you can rent it. This is an easy find. I have it on DVD and I think also Blu-ray too. So it's definitely a movie worth owning.
That's crazy that it's not streaming. I can't believe that.
I know.
I mean, it flopped. It apparently kind of killed Slater's career, and he went off and sort of did some pretty questionable life choices after that. But you can't help but wonder. You feel like, well, what if that had done well? Because he is really good in it. Actually, he's really fantastic.
I think this is like considered a cult classic. Honestly, kind of like probably a lot of your movies are ones that didn't necessarily do super well at the time, but then like in retrospect, they have like a different status now.
Yeah, I think Sexy Beast was probably the only one that was sort of deemed a success, and that was a small indie.
Right, in comparison. Yeah. True Romance. Now we are at the final film of Rob's 5 picks. This is 1971's, so we're back in the 70s, Get Carter, directed by Mike Hodges. The original, not the remake, which I don't even know if you think is absolutely horrendous.
I haven't seen it.
Or if it's, oh, okay, so that's even worse.
I've heard it's terrible. I'll watch it at some point, but...
Sylvester Stallone, right?
Yeah.
Is Jack? Yeah, probably not want to revisit that. So this Get Carter is your number one, and actually, Rob had given this 5 stars on Letterboxd, and that's what sparked this idea. Was I saw your review, and it was so glowing, and you loved it so much. I thought maybe he needs to like craft your topic around this. So this was kind of the thing that made me think this was a genre you were a fan of.
Yeah, and you had good instincts. Yeah, so it probably comes through that. I mean, this is a film for me. I first saw like on late night TV when I was about 14, I think, and I thought this was weird old crusty film, but it's a bit edgy. And it took a while for me to realize how much I love it, actually. And it's probably only recently, although I've seen it many times. It's only recently, in the last few years, as I've really gotten into film more heavily, that I think I've recognised how good a film it is. And it's, to me, it's just very cinematic. It's really weird to call this film beautiful because it's so ugly. I mean, it's. So this is. I mean, maybe we should talk about the plot a bit. So this is basically early 70s. This is young Michael Caine, and if you're used to Michael Caine playing Alfred from Batman and that sort of stuff, you got to see him.
Oh, old Michael Caine.
Yeah. Or doing comedies and that kind of thing. You got to. He is unbelievable in this, and I think I mentioned earlier that there's great villains. And that in one film, the protagonist might be the villain. I mean, that is the journey you go through in this film. Is you start out with an anti-hero, and by the end of the film, you're really wondering, okay, is there anything redeemable about this guy at all, or is he just a monster? And my money's on Monster, basically. And I just find that transformation, that sort of revealing of himself through the film quite fascinating.
And I think you compared him to a shark, too, in your review.
Yeah, and I think, I wonder if that's deliberate. He wears this smooth dark blue suit. The whole film is dark blue, so various shades of blue, and a sort of shit brown over it, and grey. A lot of grey, and that's the colour of this film. It's filmed in winter. It's all filmed in the northern English city of Newcastle, circa 1971. Coal mining town. It's a great town. I don't want any Novocastrians who happen to listen to this think I'm getting down on Newcastle, but it's a rough working class kind of milieu that's presented here, and it's all about the gangster, the sort of the underworld within this city, and it's early 70s, so everything looks a bit crusty and horrible anyway, just in terms of the fashion and everything else.
Like a film over it.
Yeah, I mean, it's grim. I mean, it just looks really grim. So he's a guy, he's down in London. He finds out his brother has died, apparently drunk himself into a stupor and had a car accident, which he doesn't believe. He believes he's been murdered. And he goes up there to try to, his hometown, and he goes back to try to find out what's happened. And yeah, he's a mean, nasty motherfucker in this movie. And yeah, at first you wonder, you've got all these really scary looking Newcastle thugs who all act really nervous when he turns up, and you're like, what are they scared of? And then you sort of realize, you find out why they're scared of the guy.
And he's so tender and loving towards his brother's daughter. So when he's introduced to her, you kind of feel like, oh, this guy's not that bad.
Yeah.
I mean, because he has an affection. That's how I was going to tell you. I know there's not like a romantic connection in this one like the other ones, but for him with, I think her name was Doreen in the movie, but for him with his niece, he actually is very sweet. So that kind of throws off your, the whole feeling of like, well, this guy is just like, totally irredeemable, because he does love her and take care of her as best as he can.
That's the thing, actually. Yeah, his monstrosity, when it really rears its head, because he does some horrible things in the final act of this film. The gloves come off, and he does stuff that you watch and think, that's too far. That's too much. That is nasty. Some people sort of beyond all proportion in terms for some of the people, especially some of the women he victimizes along the way, who are not blameless, but kind of they just let it happen, what happens. But I think the stuff with it all gets triggered from the humanity in him, which is his relationship with this girl.
Right. So his actions are somewhat understandable, as opposed to being like, just outright evil. We can somewhat understand.
Yeah. It's more ruthlessness than evil, isn't it? It's
yes,
but it's almost beyond ruth. I mean, there are moments here. I mean, there's one scene where he's beaten a guy up, at the top of a parking garage next to the barrier, and it's all sort of going as you would expect it to go. And then suddenly, without warning, he just picks him up and throws him over, and you're like, oh, okay, that guy's dead. I mean, you're not going to. That's 19 stores. But he does it without even thinking. It's no big deal. Right. You are going over, mate. Mm-hmm. You're involved in some way. You're dead. So it's, yeah. I mean, I just find this film has an incredibly rich cinematic texture to it. It's the cinematography is amazing, and the cinematographer is a guy called Wolfgang Schitzky. He hasn't actually done that much great stuff. He's done a lot of exploitation, fairly cheap exploitation type films, but his photography in this film is unbelievable. Not just in terms of how he captures this stuff, but it adheres a little bit almost to the new Hollywood stuff that was going on in the States, where there's a lot of impressionism to the way shots are blocked, and there's a lot of usage of foreground and background and texture to what's in frame, which it's always visually quite incredible. I mean, it always amazes me that Mike Hodges could make a film like this. I think this was his first film.
Yes. He shares that with Glazer.
I watch this film and think, well, that's the first film of a master filmmaker. He's not really made anything since then that's anywhere near as good, strangely. I mean, he made Flash Gordon, which I personally love, but it's a very different sort of movie to this. And he's just been sort of, maybe his career hasn't gone in the way he would have liked. I don't know. But this is an art film in a way, in the way that it's put together.
And I think the pacing is really good to know about prior to maybe like, this is, I think when I wrote about it, I was saying this is a movie for grownups. This feels like one of those movies where it's not going to explain things to you. It's going to take its time. You got to kind of like get into a different mindset than we're used to seeing now, in a way, because this distinctly feels like it's made for like an adult person. Like we're not going to like sit here and hold your hand.
It's not like the plot's that complicated, but there's a lot of nuance to it. And I watched it last night, and I'm picking up on stuff that I've not picked up on before. Going, okay, that's what that means. Because nothing is spoon fed to you. You have to notice what people are saying, why they're reacting non-verbally to things a certain way. It is a film that very much rewards repeat viewings. You know, the fact that it's told in strokes of brutality and vengeance. You know, this is what I love about these kinds of movies. This is the aesthetic, right? This is how it's telling a story.
I agree completely, and I think that we didn't really talk about the end of Sexy Beast, but this one is probably the more on the like rough side as opposed to that, but I think definitely both feature performances that you do not want to miss.
Yeah, definitely.
That is Get Carter. I watched this on HBO Max streaming, and I believe they have that one and the remake if you want to check that out after you see this, but please do not watch the remake first. Get Carter, Mike Hodges, HBO Max. And now we are at the top 5 questions that I have that is modeled after James Lipton's Inside the Actors Studio questionnaire at the end of his episodes. And we're going to start with number 1 for Rob. Put you on the spot. What is the most underrated movie?
Okay. This is the thing, right? I have a tendency to champion films that everyone hates. None of the ones on this list have been particularly controversial, but I like quite a few films that, you know, get like sub 2-star ratings on Letterboxd kind of thing. The most high profile one that I'm constantly championing is probably Alien Resurrection.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
I love that movie. It's brilliant. I can't understand why people don't like it. It's just so. I remember seeing that at the cinema, and I had always thought that everyone loved that movie. I was so shocked to find out that everyone hated it.
Resurrection is Sigourney Weaver and Winona Ryder, right? That's the fourth one.
Yeah, it's the one that Joss Whedon hates it too, but he wrote it. And it's directed by Jean-Pierre Jeunet. And I love that there is a Jean-Pierre Jeunet Alien movie because it's as bonkers batshit as that should be. The guy who made Delicatessen.
Wow, that's a good one. I haven't seen that in a very, very long time, but I know it was like critically just not.
It's Sigourney's best performance in all the Alien films by far.
Wow.
She's amazing, sort of conveying this partly alien kind of DNA kind of thing that she's got going on. And I think what really puts people off is it's got, maybe you need to like Genet, but his films have that sort of weird French farcical comedy bit. You know, there's a scene in that film where Dan Hedaya gets his brain spluttered out and it's in his hand and he looks at it and goes, it's just like really dumb, but I kind of, it totally fits a Genet film. So yeah, so that's that. And it's kind of, it's got the Firefly team in the middle of it. It's basically like Firefly. I don't know if you've seen the Joss Whedon show Firefly mashed up.
I've
with
heard
Alien.
of it. I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
So, okay. Alien Resurrection.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'll die on a hill for that one.
That's a great one, Rob. That literally fits the criteria. Like the whole purpose of this, it fits it to a T, because that's not one I would normally reevaluate, but now I'm considering.
I have quite a lot of films that people can't believe that I like.
Meet that. Alien Resurrection. Okay, number 2. What is your happiest movie experience?
That is it's going to be from childhood. Most people must say one from their childhood, don't they, when you ask them this question, surely?
Yes, or, it's like a Marvel where it's like everybody's clapping and it's like a theater
Right.
experience,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
just like the film
I think
itself.
for me, it was
Yeah.
probably seeing Ghostbusters on my 9th birthday because I was allowed to take friends to. That was the first time I didn't have a little party. We were allowed to go out, and my older sister and one of her friends. So there wasn't even any grown-ups involved, and we got to go and see Ghostbusters, and I was all about ghosts and that sort of stuff then, but wasn't able to see horror films and that kind of thing. So that was pretty cool. I think that was kind of there are a lot of there are a few films I went and saw at the cinema as a kid which are kind of very happy memories, I think, because for a long time I just assumed cinemas were only showed stuff that was kind of, I used to really like the science fiction, fantastical sort of fantasy type, adventure type stuff as a kid. And I'd only go to the cinema when one of those movies was playing. So when I found out that actually you could go see a drama or something, I was like, oh, that's not as much fun. I thought cinemas were that whole feel was all about seeing something like that. So yeah,
Yeah, something more like lighthearted and like on the big screen.
sort of magical. It was sort of a magical place for me. Yeah, it was stuff. I mean, the first film I ever saw at the cinema was the 1981 Clash of the Titans, with full of Ray Harryhausen stop motion stuff, and I think that just kind of set me up for life in terms of what sort of movies I would like.
That you were expecting to
Yeah,
see?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Okay, so we got Alien Resurrection and Ghostbusters. Okay. Number 3. This one I'm going to be interested to hear your answer, particularly. A movie that you changed your opinion on.
Yeah, because that doesn't happen a lot with me. I often they often improve for me, but I don't like flip flop on them. If I hate it, I probably keep hating it. If I love it, I'll probably keep liking it to some extent. The only one I could think of was when I first saw Lost Highway. I was just like, I was so disappointed.
Oh.
I was like, what was that about? And I wasn't ready for that level of weirdness. I was like, I don't understand what happened.
Ugh.
It's no story. And, I was a Lynch fan, but I obviously needed a bit more narrative conventionality than what was in Lost Highway. That's a film I've completely turned around on and now completely love. Although it is probably one of the only films I've ever gone on the internet and tried to research what does it actually mean, because I couldn't figure it out on my own.
And you've got another Patricia Arquette there.
Yeah. She's great in that too, actually. Yeah, I forgot she was in that. But
oh yeah, I can't forget because the car scene at the end.
Yeah, I think that's I love that movie now. I mean, I love most Lynch, but that one left me sort of a bit underwhelmed when I first saw it.
Yeah, that one I actually hated. I think that one's like a half star right now for me on Letterboxd, but I think for sure that I did not understand it, and not only did I not understand it, but like it was infuriating that that the actor changes midway, right? Doesn't Bill Pullman yeah, right. So it's too Lynch.
I'm still quite literal minded enough about it that I now have an interpretation of the film, which who knows if it's right. I don't know if it's what he intended, whatever. That I did not come up with myself.
Mm-hmm.
That I read other people's stuff and was like, oh yeah, that plays. Yeah, I get that. And now I like it. So I obviously already liked the stylistic stuff, but there was nothing to hang it on. Whereas now that story for me, I get, and it's actually quite clever. And I think with Lynch, there is the thing that stops him. This is a subject for another day, but the thing that stops him being a true surrealist is I think he always has a narrative in mind. He just refuses to explain it. Whereas someone like Buñuel doesn't have a narrative. Not always, often doesn't have a narrative.
Yeah, and Lynch doesn't care. Lynch doesn't care at all to explain it, and he doesn't care if you don't get it. He's just like, they're like, would you elaborate on that? And he's like, no.
And he's right. Explaining something kind of reduces it, so I get his view on that.
That's what he says, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Wow. These are interesting answers. Okay. So number 2 or 4, my favorite question. What is an actor you find undeniably sexy?
Very relevant to, doggedly nasty crime films. But for me, it's Pam Grier. She is. Oh, I love Pam Grier. Yeah.
Wow.
Even in Jackie Brown, it was the first thing I saw
Jackie
her in. I was
Brown.
like, wow. And when she was older. But having caught up a couple of films that could have got on this list, Coffee and Foxy Brown. Yeah, she's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
She is incredible.
I think Tarantino would probably agree with
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Okay, so last question. This is the one that hangs people up. But if you were to die and come back as a movie character, who would you choose?
Nick Charles. Nick and Nora.
Nick Charles.
This is going way back. You ever seen a Nick and Nora film?
Wait.
The Thin Man?
Yeah, you're talking about like the Thin Man. That's a great answer.
Yeah, I think I'd want to come back as Nick Charles because all he does, like, he knows everyone. Everyone's his friend. He can get anything he wants. He's got all the money he needs. He goes to bed every night with Myrna Loy. And they just sit around drinking and having fun the whole time.
Drinking. I was about to say, this is like the
drinking in the 30s was the best. There was no consequence. You know what I mean? It was like, yeah, just drink. Have a good time. If it feels good, do it.
All day. Yeah. And they're, he's also just so chill.
He's so cool. I love William Powell.
Well, probably because I love William Powell. Well, and the drinking probably makes him more chill when things are going awry. But he's also like an ex-detective or something in that movie, right? He's like
which is why he knows everyone.
Yeah.
And I like Myrna Loy too. You know, Myrna Loy is, I mean, he's got it made.
He's got it made. And that is wonderful. For some reason, my brain went to like Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist, but that's where probably they took that from.
Yeah.
Is Nick and Nora Charles. Yeah. Okay, well that is a great note to end on. Everybody should watch The Thin Man.
Oh yeah,
too.
It's like awesome.
Plug for it's awesome, and they made so many of those, but I do like the original the most.
I think it's the best.
But yeah, well, Rob, thank you for being on the show today.
Pleasure.
And I hope that you all will check out Rob's top 5. Just to recap, it is Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, The Italian Connection, Sexy Beast, True Romance, and Get Carter. See ya at the movies.